All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most ambitious design projects in all of human history, the American system of government. We're going to unpack how it was built, why it was built that way, and how this whole incredible story really started with a single, powerful question.
So let's just start right there. I want you to imagine this for a second. You've just broken free from a powerful king who controlled every aspect of your life. So your number one fear, the thing that keeps you up at night, is creating another tyrant. How do you build a government that's strong enough to actually work, but not so strong that it crushes your freedom? That was the exact nail-biting puzzle the American founders had to solve. And this slide really gets to the heart of their whole debate. It's like they were caught in this philosophical tug of war. On one side, you've got the ideas of guys like Thomas Hobbes, who basically said, look, without a strong government, life is just total chaos. People need a powerful ruler to keep them safe. But on the other side, you've got John Locke arguing for liberty. He said, no, people have natural rights to life, liberty, and property. And the only reason government even exists is to protect those rights. This constant tension, this push and pull between order and liberty, well, that's the engine that drives this entire story.
So how in the world did these big philosophical ideas actually explode into a full-blown revolution? Well, it wasn't some sudden thing. It was more like a slow burn, the result of centuries of powerful ideas finally reaching a boiling point.
Think of it like a stack of building blocks, right? The foundation for this whole thing was laid way before 1776. At the very bottom, you've got something like the Magna Carta, which planted the seed of an idea that even a king has to follow the law. Then, you stack on top of that these incredible Enlightenment thinkers like Montesquieu, who came up with this game-changing concept of separating government power. And then, you add more than 100 years of the colonists just kind of governing themselves. So when Britons suddenly started trying to impose taxes without asking them, it felt like a total betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, you see. It was about a core principle they had come to live by. No taxation without representation. That was the breaking point.
So they fight the war, and they win. Fantastic. Now what? Well, their first try at building a government was, let's just say it was a massive overcorrection. They were so haunted by the memory of King George that they designed a system that was so weak it was almost guaranteed to fail.
They called this first attempt the Articles of Confederation. And the phrase to remember here is loose alliance. Seriously, don't think of it as one country. It was more like 13 little independent countries that just kind of promised to be friends. The national government was designed on purpose to be incredibly weak because they thought that was the only way to protect their liberty.
But as you can imagine, this design had some critical weaknesses. The national government had no power to tax anyone, so it had no money. There was no president to actually enforce the laws they passed, no national courts to settle arguments between states, and maybe the worst part, to make any big changes, you needed all 13 states to agree. I mean, can you imagine? Nothing ever got done. The whole system was basically paralyzed from the start.
So, what do you think happened? Without a central government to manage the economy or defend the nation? Yeah, the result was pretty predictable. Just chaos.
And then came the moment that changed everything. A group of farmers in Massachusetts, buried in debt, rose up in an armed rebellion. And the national government? It was completely, utterly powerless to do anything about it. This event, Shays' Rebellion, was like a giant alarm bell that woke everybody up. It was the final, undeniable proof that their first experiment had failed. Miserably. It was time to go back to the drawing board.
And this brings us to the Constitutional Convention. This was round 2. This was their second and much more ambitious attempt to finally create a government that was both strong enough to work and safe enough to live under.
And they started with maybe the 3 most revolutionary words they could have written. We the people. I mean, you can't overstate what a radical shift this was. Under the old Articles, all the power came from the states. The Constitution flipped that on its head and declared that power comes directly from the citizens. It completely changed the entire game.
So, to build this new government, they relied on 4 brilliant design principles. First, popular sovereignty. That's the whole we the people idea, that the government's power comes from us. Second, that power is given to a limited government, meaning even the government itself has to follow the law. Then, to keep that government from getting too powerful, they used separation of powers, splitting its duties into 3 distinct branches. And here's the masterstroke: checks and balances, giving each of those branches specific ways to block or limit the power of the other 2. Genius.
Okay, so those are the big ideas. But how do they actually put these principles into practice? Let's take a look at the actual structure they built.
So the core of the structure splits the government into three co-equal branches. You've got Article 1, which creates the legislative branch, that's Congress, and their job is to make the laws. Then Article 2 creates the executive branch, led by the president, whose job is to enforce the laws. And finally, Article 3 sets up the judicial branch, the courts, and their job is to interpret the laws. A really simple, really clear division of labor.
But they didn't just divide power horizontally between the branches. They also did something really clever. They divided it vertically. This whole concept is called federalism, and it's all about sharing power between the new, stronger national government and the individual state governments. It was their way of creating a unified country while still preserving a lot of local control. So what does this power sharing actually look like in practice? Well, the national government gets certain specific powers. They call them enumerated powers, things only it can do, like, say, declaring war. Then the states get to keep all the other powers, the reserved powers, like running their own elections. And then there are some powers that both of them can do, called concurrent powers, like levying taxes. It's this complex, ongoing dance of shared authority that continues to this day.
Now, it's really easy to look back on all of this and think it was all smooth sailing, that it was inevitable. But you gotta remember, getting this new constitution approved was a massive, knockdown, drag-out fight. It only happened because of some really heated debates and, in the end, some major compromises.
So basically, two opposing teams emerged. You had the Federalists, who argued that without a stronger national government, the country was just going to fall apart. But then you had the Anti-Federalists, and they were terrified. They looked at this new, powerful government and saw a monster in the making, a threat to the very liberties they had just fought and died for. And to get everybody to agree, they had to make some deals. The Great Compromise, for example, solved a huge fight between the big states and the small states over how they'd be represented. The solution? A two-house Congress, the House, based on population, and the Senate, where every state gets 2 votes. But then came a much darker compromise. To get the southern states to sign on, they agreed to the 3/5 compromise. It was a horrific calculation that decided each enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a human being for representation and taxes, and it tragically wrote slavery into the nation's founding document. But even with those deals on the table, the Anti-Federalists still refused to sign. They needed one more thing, an absolute guarantee of individual rights. And so, the promise to add a Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, that was the final, critical compromise that sealed the deal and got the Constitution ratified. It was their insurance policy against a government that might one day become a tyrant. And you have to remember, the story didn't just stop in 1787. The founders were smart enough to know they couldn't predict the future, so they built in a process to amend the Constitution. And over time, that process has allowed the very definition of "we the people" to grow and expand, with amendments finally extending the right to vote to more and more citizens. And get this, the Constitution can even correct itself. The 18th Amendment was passed and it banned alcohol, kicking off the era of prohibition. It turned out to be a complete and total disaster. So, just 14 years later, the 21st Amendment was passed to repeal it, to undo the mistake. It's an incredible example of the flexibility that's built right into the system. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. The Constitution was never intended to be some static set of rules carved in stone. It was designed to be a framework, a living document that could adapt and change over time. The story of American government is still being written, right now. So the only real question left is, what's the next chapter going to be?